Well, we were talking about how this podcast is 10 years old, and apparently we're going to go 10 more years afterwards as well. But that actually brings us to what I wanted to start the show with. And the person who unfortunately passed away just a couple days ago, the person that is most responsible, the number one person that is most responsible for this show existing, for the flagship existing, passed away. John Madden. And you're probably wondering, what? Excuse me? What is former Oakland Raiders head coach, football commentator John Madden, what the hell does he have to do with Joe Lanza, Rich Kraich, and the Flagship Podcast? Well, if you don't know the origin story of this show and how Joe and I met and how Joe and I started talking about wrestling together, was we met on Madden Mania, which was a Madden football game, sports video game website. It eventually became Virtual Sports Network, and I think it was affiliate names as well. But it started out as Madden Mania. When I started was Madden Mania. I believe when you started was Madden Mania as well. Is that correct?
Yes.
So that's how we first interacted with one another, and it was all sports video games, and that's what the biggest part of that entire site was, doing online games, doing franchises, doing that sort of stuff. That's what it was all about, sliders, all this sort of stuff we'll get into a little bit as well, but it was all about the Madden video game, and that's the reason you were on there, that's the reason I was on there, that's the reason all these people were on here, is because of the Madden football game. Now, the way that you and I eventually met and eventually started, talking about wrestling is that there was a wrestling thread on that on the message board. It was one thread amongst 1,000 other sports threads and all this sort of stuff, but it was a very small group of people that loved wrestling and wanted to talk about wrestling, despite the fact they were all in this, sports video game website. So it was me, it was you, it was Larry, who I know is listening to this as well, a few other people that were instrumental in this show even beginning and even starting. And I always said the first people that listened to us, the 5 people that listened to us for the first half a year or whatever, all those people were from there, because that's this show started as the wrestling podcast for Virtual Sports Network or whatever, but we don't have to get into all the minutia of that. At the end of the day, all that happened is you and I started talking about wrestling on that board, and then that kind of continued for, I don't know, I would say I was on that board for, I don't want to say a decade, but maybe, honestly, I'm trying to think of when I jumped on. I probably jumped on in 2003, 2004, and we obviously didn't start the flagship until 2011, so yeah, 6-7 years or so of doing that, and that directly led to us starting this flagship podcast 10 years ago, and it's directly led to us where we are today. So in a weird way, if not for the Madden video game, I don't know that this show would ever exist. I don't know that I would have ever talked to you. There's other opportunities. Maybe you and I would have met on the Wrestling Observer board, because I eventually became a Wrestling Observer subscriber. You're a Wrestling Observer subscriber. Maybe we would have met on there. But we wouldn't have had any reason really to cross paths that much on the board, because there was a bunch of other people on the board, everyone else talking wrestling, all that sort of stuff. But really what I was going to say, even more so than that, is I don't know that I would still be a wrestling fan if not for you and Larry and all those other people at the Madden Mania message board, because I had fallen out of favor of WWE, and you guys were saying, hey, watch this Ring of Honor stuff. Hey, watch this Japan stuff. Hey, watch this. You were instrumental in me watching Ring of Honor, and me watching Japanese wrestling, and me watching all this other stuff, that probably would not have happened. And would have probably happened is in 2004 or whatever, 2005, I would have just stopped watching wrestling. I just would have stopped. And we talked about this a couple weeks ago when I talked about Ring of Honor. Ring of Honor is probably what saved my wrestling fandom, because if Ring of Honor didn't exist, and if you didn't tell me about Ring of Honor, and Larry didn't tell me about Ring of Honor or whatever, I'm probably just going to stop watching wrestling. So I would have no reason to be on the Wrestling Observer message board. So yes, the Madden video game and John Madden himself is the reason this show exists. I truly believe he is the most important person in this podcast existing. 100%. There's just no way we would have crossed paths otherwise.
I agree. Yeah, we wouldn't have, because it was all because of that video game. Now, John Madden is, or was, a cultural icon, a true cultural icon, the likes of which coming out of sports. I don't think it's overstating it when you talk about other living sports figures. I think the only one in his class, I think it's Michael Jordan, and then I think that's the list. Because when you look at John Madden and his career and his sphere of influence is so enormous. He is not only the greatest pro football color analyst of all time, and it's not even close. I don't even believe it's debatable. He's probably the greatest sports color analyst of all time. He was such a famous and important figure calling football games that he became famous outside of football, to the point he's one of the most instrumental people in television history because of that. And then you look at the video game, and at this point, the video game has been around for so long that really anyone under 50, right? Because the first game came out in 1989. The first console version of the game, I think, came out in 1990.
1990, yeah. 1988 is the first one. That's the DOS one. But yeah, 1990 was the first John Madden football.
So, I mean, if you're
all you have to say is, we don't say NFL 12. We say Madden 12. That's all you need to know about. It still has his name. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. It just is. Yeah, it's just Madden.
He was on the cover for the first 10 years of the game. There wasn't even a player on the cover.
If you're a video game player under the age of 50, which isn't exactly young, the Madden series is instrumental to you as a video game player. And those video games helped cultivate multiple decades worth of NFL fans. Those Madden video games are partially responsible for the NFL having an absolute death grip on not just sports, but American culture. On Christmas,
I was just about to point out the Christmas Day ratings. They obliterated the NBA.
Yeah. The Packers and the Browns did 29 million viewers. And head-to-head, across the dial, the Suns and the Warriors, about as big a game as you can put
two of the best
together.
teams in the league. A potential Western Conference Finals matchup. Yeah. Awesome game.
5 million viewers.
Yeah.
I mean, just obliterated them. And I'm not crediting Madden 100% for that, but the video game has something to do with the explosive growth of the NFL over the same period. Because that video game created NFL fans. And what's funny is when I was a kid and John Madden was doing NFL games with Pat Summerall, my father would always remind me, he was a great coach, because I wasn't old enough to remember John Madden as a coach. And my father would always make it a point to remind me that John Madden was a coach of the great Oakland Raiders in the 70s. And now I have to make it a point to remind people who only know him from the video game that he was the greatest color analyst in the history of football. And he changed that genre, right? And the video game has been out the video game is so old now that there's like adults who don't remember when the video game was good. Like, that video game used to be great. And it hasn't been great in like 15 years. It's been terrible. Panned by critics. Still sells a gajillion copies. And is still hugely influential and all that. But the game has been out so long that there's people who don't even remember that the game used to be great. Because the game was great. And ahead of its time. And the first realistic sim on consoles and everything else. And there's people who don't even remember that at this point. But this guy had 3 Hall of Fame careers. He was a Hall of Fame NFL coach. Rich, his record as an NFL coach was 103, 32, and 7. He went to 7 AFC championship games. He won a Super Bowl. And he only coached for, 10 years.
Yeah, retired on top, too. Just kind of one day was like, I'm done with this. And left. And bounced.
7 AFC championship games in 10 years. And a Super Bowl win. He still has the highest winning percentage in the history of the National Football League among coaches that won 100 or more games. He won 75% of his games. So he's a Hall of Fame coach. Then he was the greatest television announcer of all time. He's a Hall of Famer in that regard. And then you'd have to put him in any video game Hall of Fame that exists. I don't know if any do. He's got to be first ballot with that. And then as a pitchman and a salesman and a television pitchman, he was all over television for 25 years. Tough Actin' Tinactin, Outback Steakhouse. You go right down the line.
Ace, I know he did Ace Hardware for sure. I remember.
Yeah. So it's like, this guy had like 3 or 4 Hall of Fame worthy careers. And because of the video game, which is still at the top of pop culture consciousness to this day, after his death, he has remained a pop culture icon for 5 decades. For 50 years, this man has been a pop culture icon. 50 years. And he will remain one beyond his death because of the video game. It's remarkable. And he didn't play a single down in the NFL. Got injured in his first training camp, didn't play a down in the NFL. And despite that, he's arguably, and I would put him at number one, the most influential person in the history of the NFL. And one of the most influential people in sports, period, in American sports. And as I said at the top, I put Michael Jordan on his level and no one else in terms of influence to both his sport and to culture as a whole, in terms of people that have come from sports. I mean, and it can't be understated. He also changed the way football games were called on television.
Mm-hmm.
And people
and how they sounded too, which go over, because there's some stuff that I wanted to dig into as well. But yeah, go into like, you know, how they were presented first, and I'll tell you about the sound and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, so when he retired from coaching in '78, the networks came after him, and he didn't want to do it. And he didn't want to do it because he hated the way announcers called football games. He said, I don't want to do it. I hate it. I can't do that. It's not good. And his agent said, well, if you don't take the deal, they were offering him like some tryout games, 4 to 6 games that season or whatever it was. He's like, if you don't take the deal, they may not ask you ever again. So why don't you just try it? If you hate it, you don't have to do it anymore. If you like it, you know, then you found something. They gave him $3,000 a game that first season, $3,000 a game, and a 4-game contract, just a little tryout deal. And he said, I'll do it, but I'm going to do it my way. And what he meant by that was, before Madden, okay, when these guys called the games, they literally just told you what was happening. They didn't try to teach you anything. They didn't get very granular with it. And he hated that. You know, he thought it was surface level and vapid. But he wanted to teach the game. So he would explain why a play worked. He wouldn't just tell you that it worked, right? But the magic of John Madden is he was such an everyman, and he was so relatable. And he was this big cartoonish looking figure, ugly as hell, overweight. He didn't speak articulately. He talked like a guy sitting next to you, you know, on a bar stool. So he didn't talk over anybody's head, but he had this great balance where he was able to describe what was happening in an intelligent way without going over the viewer's head. And there was an enthusiasm there, and it was totally unlike. Now everybody calls the games like that because of him. And this cuts across all sports too, not just football. Because there's some 25-year-old listening to us right now thinking, so what? Every color guy does that. Yeah, but they didn't.
Right, they didn't before that. Yeah, a lot of the prior announcers were, one half was like just normal, like kind of television announcer guy, like your usual sportscaster announcer guy. And then a lot of times it would be an ex-star. And like we see that a lot these days, but we see a lot of coaches now in the ranks as far as announcers, because people want that a little bit more detail. People want to know how the plays develop. People want to know why something worked, and not just, you know, some vapid, you know, generic, like, yeah, here's what's happening. Here's, you know, and that's Madden. You know what I mean? And before it was like, you weren't going to have some ugly fat coach as your next, you know, announcer. Was going to be like, you know, here's the star quarterback from the old team, or here's like a star running back or whatever. And a lot of times those guys had nothing interesting to say, or they weren't very good at the job or whatever. And then they realized, and yeah, from that point forward, it was, you know, TV, sports on TV got a lot better. A lot better. I would say, you know, I'd say we've regressed a little bit in recent years, but there was a time when it was awesome, where every single broadcast was, you know, normal sportscaster. Maybe it was an ex-athlete, but a lot of times it was an ex-coach, and they would dig into the details and dig into the minutia and let you know why something worked. And that was across all boards. That was across basketball, across baseball, across football. Yeah, it's all because of John Madden. 100% because of John Madden.
He raised everybody's game, and he was so charismatic in the way that he did it, that they quickly realized during that tryout that he was their best guy. And then they tried him out with Vin Scully, which a lot of people don't realize. This was CBS now.
Mm-hmm.
They tried him out with Vin Scully and Pat Summerall. Scully and Summerall were vying for that number 1 spot on CBS. And Summerall had been working with Tom Brookshire for a number of years. And Scully, of course, is a legend in his own right. So Madden did games with both of those guys for those first couple of years. And Summerall won out. And when you think about it, it makes way too much sense, because if you think about Vin Scully's play-by-play style, Vin Scully is an air filler. He always has these great anecdotes.
Yeah, he's coloring.
about
He's
players.
coloring the lines and giving you a describing the clouds that are coming across the sky and stuff. So
and these little facts about the players and the background information. Vin Scully's a wordsmith, right? And that's not a good pair with John Madden because John Madden is going to fill all that time in between the plays. Whereas think of Pat Summerall, an economy of words. He was he got so much out of so little. I mean, a typical Pat Summerall call would be he would just name the player. He would just say he would just go Montana, Rice, first down. That's it. That was his call. And then Madden would jump in and go, well, let's see what happened here. You see Rice, he runs a skinny post. And, Pat Terrell wasn't able to cover him because he just can't keep up with him. And then Madden fills in the gap. They were a much better pair chemistry-wise because of their styles. Where Vin Scully and John Madden, where a lot of people might be saying, wow, that would have been incredible.
Yeah, nah, they wouldn't have.
Not so much because they both want to talk. And that's not taking anything away from Vin Scully.
No, Vin's best role was the role he had for 80 years or whatever, which Vin Scully by himself. You know what I mean?
Yes.
The baseball role that he had. Vin Scully calling Dodgers games by himself, sitting in the booth going, Kirk Gibson, by the way, if you don't know about Kirk Gibson, he's, and then, telling you about his 11-year-old Little League team or whatever. It's like, yeah, awesome, great. Like,
so when Kirk Gibson was 13, that's down and away for a ball.
Right, yeah.
He did both jobs. He was so good. He could do both jobs by himself.
He was the best. He was incredible.
So the Summerall Madden team was just perfect. And then from there, it just changed sports broadcasting forever. And they are the most iconic duo in all of sports broadcasting to this day. It's Summerall and Madden. They were the voice of my childhood in the fall. Everyone knows I'm a big NFL fan. So you'd wake up on Sunday and you'd have the early game where I was. It was usually the Jets because the Giants were usually the better team in those days. Because I grew up with Parcells and Lawrence Taylor and Phil Simms and Harry Carson and Leonard Marshall and Gary Reasons and Phil McConkey and Joe Morris, those great Giants teams. And the Jets at that time, they were okay, but, Ken O'Brien, Freeman McNeil, Al Toon, that whole group.
They weren't that okay. They were kind of bad.
They were bad later on, yeah. But it'd usually be the Jets at 1 o'clock, right? And you'd get them on NBC because that was the AFC channel. So you'd get Don Criqui or Dick Enberg or somebody like that calling the game. And then the late window would come around 4 o'clock. And even if it wasn't, if it was the Giants versus the Redskins at the time, or the Cowboys, or the Eagles, or the Madden called a lot of Bears games. He'd call a lot of 49ers versus Rams, like when John Robinson was coaching the Rams and they were doing, before they fell apart later in the 90s. And John Robinson, by the way, the great coach of USC and later the Rams, grew up with John Madden. They were childhood friends. A lot of people don't know that either. They grew up together, played sports together, and were lifelong friends. Okay, so Madden would always call the late game on CBS, and Madden and Summerall, they were like the soundtrack of my falls when I was a kid. And you knew when that late game would come on, and it was almost time, like the weekend was ticking down. When you heard Pat Summerall and John Madden. And at the end of the game, Pat Summerall would always say, stay tuned for 60 minutes and Murder, She Wrote. And you knew that game was about to end and it was getting dark out.
That is ingrained in my head. The sound of the 60-minute stopwatch.
Yeah.
That's Summerall. Stay tuned for 60 minutes following this.
Followed by Murder, She Wrote, right? And except on the West Coast, right?
Yeah, except on the West. I always, as a kid, I was always like, man, I don't understand why that is. And I'm sure my dad explained it to me, but I just never got it. I was like, but what do you mean except on the West? Like, what do they show on the West Coast? And my dad tried his best to explain what they were showing on the West Coast. My little brain could not figure it out. And
young Rich didn't grasp time.
Dude, honestly, my brain still barely figures it out. I was on the West Coast during that the Dynamite Grand Slam, remember? And I'm telling you, Joe, I don't know when this show is on or when it's going to air or whatever. It's still confusing. Hell, it's been a point of contention for AEW fans as of late.
Yeah. So, and that would indicate, well, shit, I got to go to school tomorrow. The NFL day is over and I got to go to school tomorrow. So then Madden, he jumped to Monday Night Football in 2002 to work with Al Michaels. And listen, if Summerall and Madden are the most iconic commentary duo in the history of sports, to me, and this might be controversial, I thought Madden and Michaels were the best. I thought they were the best because you had the best color man of all time with Madden and the best play-by-play man of all time with Al Michaels. And they worked together for a couple of years on Monday Night Football. Then NBC got back in the game with the Sunday Night Football package, and that became the preeminent package. A lot of people may not remember, Monday Night Football used to be the top package. That changed in 2006 or whatever it was when NBC picked up Monday Night Football and Sunday Night Football, and that became the top package. And now Monday Night Football is kind of like the secondary package. And it was important to get Michaels and Madden to establish that Sunday Night Football is the big game now, not Monday Night Football. So we have to get Madden. Same thing when Fox jumped in the game in 1994. Okay, Fox won the broadcast rights to the NFC. They outbid CBS, who had the rights to the NFC games for 35 years. Fox came in, Rupert Murdoch, with that, I think it was a $2.2 billion bid, which at the time was considered a massive overpay. What are they doing? They're nuts. And CBS said, we don't need the NFL that bad. Well, that turned out to be a mistake. And 4 years later, CBS outbid NBC for the AFC package and got back into the NFL. But Fox at the time was like a nothing network. Fox at the time, Rich, only had 50 affiliates in the United States. There were 209 markets in the U.S. And when Fox won the rights to the NFL, they only had affiliates in 50 out of the 209 markets in America. So, yeah, they spent billions of dollars on this pack, but what did that mean? Every market
had to get the NFL, had to get Fox because they wanted to have the NFL,
Right. So now Fox was in all 209 markets because these markets weren't going to shut their fans out of the NFL. So, and again, to establish themselves, what did they do? You had all these free agent announcers from CBS because CBS wasn't covering the NFL anymore, and they knew they had to get Madden. And there was a bidding war. Monday Night Football wanted Madden. NBC wanted Madden. But Fox knew they had to have him. So Murdoch overpaid him too. John Madden, that first year with Fox, and that first contract he had with Fox, was paid more than any player in the league. Mm-hmm. He was paid more than any player in the league.
Yeah.
That's how important John Madden was to Fox and establishing them as an NFL entity.
And I'm glad you bring up the Fox thing because this is exactly the point. I was talking about the sound of football and the sound of sports on television. So when Fox gets it, and I forget the name of the director, the sports director for Fox, they talk about it. There's a 30 for 30 podcast about John Madden. It's called Madden's Game. This came out a couple years ago, but that's obviously worth listening to right now. And they talk about when Fox got the NFL, they brought John Madden in, and he thinks they're just going to do like a production meeting in terms of like how do you want me to commentate or whatever. And they said, John, how do you want our games to look and sound? And he's just like, well, what do you like? He's kind of taken aback, and they're like, well, we want you to do, tell us how you want it to do, how you want it to look, how you want it to sound, and all that sort of stuff. And then they said, what we want to do though, more than anything, is we want the football game on television to resemble your video game. The crashing of the pads, the sounds of the grunts, all that sort of stuff. We want that. We want the camera shots to look like they do in the video games. We want the sounds to sound like they do in the video games. We want to take over and make our broadcast look like the video game, not the opposite. And Madden's thinking, well, no, that's not how you do it. You make the the video game look like the broadcast, so you guys do whatever. And this director, whoever it was, said, no. I think the video game's awesome, and I want our broadcast to look like the video game and sound like the video game. And that's when you start to get it. And in this podcast, they listen. You listen to a CBS broadcast the year before it's on Fox. And you hear, Pat Summerall and John Madden, they call the action. You can barely hear anything. You hear the announcers. You hear a little bit of stuff from the crowd, and that's it. And then they go, okay, this is the first year on Fox. And it's hike, the guy's doing the audibles, he hikes, you hear the crashing of the pads, you hear the grunts and everything like that. And that was like they said. Yeah, they said the field mics. And they said they went from, CBS had, I don't know, like 4 or 5 field mics, and then Fox had like 400. They just the whole field was filled with mics, and they said, no, we want it to sound, because the video game, and you go back to the Sega Genesis, almost to a comical degree, the Sega Genesis Madden games, you hike and there's like, it's the guys crushing, and the sounds are awful. They sound terrible, but like that's what they wanted. They wanted that noise in a sports broadcast, and this applies to wrestling. It applies to all broadcasts. Is that noise? The noise of everything else, whether it be a wrestling ring or whether it be guys in the ring, whether it be announcers, whether it be crowds, all that sort of stuff. That's a big deal because you listen on that podcast, you listen to what CBS was doing with the NFL, and they did a fine job. But like you realize, oh my god, it's so quiet, and like the stuff that I'm used to hearing in a sports game, they just did. It wasn't that way. You could barely hear the crowd, you couldn't hear the guys, you couldn't hear all that sort of stuff. And now it's just second. We know. We just know it as secondhand that we're going to hear every single crunch of a pad. We're going to hear every single dribble and squeak of a basketball shoe or whatever. You're always going to get that. And that moment was that one where they bring in Madden and say, how do you guys do it on the video game? Because that's how we want to do it on our TV now. And that's huge.
Yeah. And even when he was at CBS, when he had finally gained a little bit of clout, when he had earned his spot and it was obvious that he was the best in the business and all that, he changed the way that they broadcast the games. He wanted them to pull the camera back. He's like, this camera's too tight.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
The viewer needs to be able to see all 22 players. We need to know what those defensive backs are doing. We need to know where the running backs are lined up, because I can't teach the game. I can't describe the game if the camera is super tight. So he even changed the way that the NFL broadcasts the games in multiple ways. His influence is so far and so deep. And a lot of people don't know this. After he retired in 2009, he didn't go home and fucking play golf. He was still involved in the game. He was on the competition committee. He was an advisor to the competition committee. Here's the other thing with Madden. He wasn't one of these old timers who didn't want things to change. He pushed for change, and he pushed for it often. He recognized that the players were getting faster and bigger and stronger, and that the game was changing and the strategies were changing, and he was at the forefront of a lot of rules changes. He was part of the safety committee until the day he died. A lot of these rules that everybody hates with all of the safety stuff, he was at the forefront of that. Everyone thinks of him as this grunt who had the All Madden team and he liked tough players, but he was also on top of all of the safety issues in the NFL.
Right. Was front and center in the early 90s of saying, hey, concussions are a serious thing. So if you have a concussion, you should really stop playing a football game because it's not that important. Your brain's more important than a stupid football game.
Did you see that clip of Jim McMahon? Did you see that? Yeah. There's a clip of Jim McMahon in 1990, whatever it is.
Yeah, he's on the Vikings. I forget what year he was on the Vikings, but yeah.
And he clearly has a concussion.
He's fucking out of it. He's so out of it. He's rolling his neck, trying so desperately to get back into his headspace, and he can't at all. But,
And this was way before CTE was in anyone's vocabulary. This was way before we knew anything about concussions. And you could hear John Madden on commentary and saying, I believe, and he says this verbatim, I believe if a player has a concussion, he shouldn't finish the game. He needs to come out of the game. That was unheard of at that time. You'd get laughed out of a room if you were on an NFL team or you were an NFL coach or you were an NFL player and you suggested that if you have a concussion, you shouldn't finish the game. They would literally just give you some smelling salts, kick you in the ass, and send you back in the game. And here you have the most important and most influential voice in the sport saying the opposite. And maybe it's because he had that kind of clout at that time and he was such an important figure that he can get away with speaking his mind in that way. But he was on the forefront of that. And right till the day he died, he was on these rules changes and safety committees trying to make the game as safe as you can. I don't think football can ever be safe, especially now with as big and fast and strong as his players are.
I agree.
But he was someone who always pushed for that, even going back 20, 25, 30 years. So he's not someone who had his feet stuck in cement either. And he's not someone whose influence stopped the day he coached, stopped the day he broadcasted, or stops with the video game. He was still instrumental in things you're seeing in the NFL today at 85 years old, sitting in his house in California. So this is what I'm saying. There's him, there's Michael Jordan, and that's the list. And that really is the truth, and that video game, cultivated and created fans for the NFL for decades. And it taught people about football. The infamous story when Trip Hawkins from EA met with him and And Madden told him, at the time, the technology didn't allow for 11 on 11. And Madden told him, he said, if you can't get 22 players on the field, I don't want my name on the game. Our conversation is over. So they had to get back to work and figure out how to get 22 players on that field. And Madden said, he figured the video game would be a great way to teach people football strategy and understand football plays. And Rich, I'm sure you'd agree with me. I learned a lot about football strategy from those games.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
When I'm a kid, I don't know what a zone defense is. I don't know what a cover 2 is. I don't know what any of these things are. But then you play Madden and you learn. And you understand the game. And those early Maddens, those playbooks are the Raider playbooks. Those are the Raiders 1970s playbooks.
Yeah, they on that podcast, Trip does tell the story that they're asking, hey, John, do you have any ideas of some plays? And he goes, oh yeah, I got some ideas. I'll send something over to you guys. So they open this package. It's just Raiders playbook. It's like Oakland Raiders playbook or Los Angeles Raiders. I forget what it was, like 1974, and it's just like 400 pages, and he's like, oh, there you go. And they're like, we don't know how to read this. We're like programmers. So he said they just sat down and said, all right, let's fucking learn football then, I guess, because he didn't give them any direction. He goes, these are good plays. These are the ones I use, so figure out how to put these in the game. And they're trying to read this scribble, and it's just like, we're computer programmers in the 80s. Like, we don't know football. Are you kidding?
Yeah, those were the Raider playbooks in the game. And he didn't just take the money and slap his name on the box. Every year he worked with those guys to improve the game and to update the game with the modern NFL. Okay? And that's what set him apart from all these other guys who just took the money and slapped their name on the box of these games.
Yeah.
And that's why in the early days, the game was so great.
Right. They'd have powwows for weeks where he'd play the game and say, this is stupid. That sucks. This is wrong. Change this. In that podcast, again, they have he's doing the voiceovers because obviously Madden would do the commentary for the games as well. And it had to be, those things had to be like weeks because he'd read a line and go, no, that doesn't make any damn bit of sense. What do you guys say? They're like, all right, John, change it. Like, it's fine. It's some dork at the end of at the other end of the window, or the other side of the window, just being like, John, whatever you want to say, man, it's fine. Because he'd read a line and go, no, what are you guys trying to say with this? This doesn't make. I would never tell a guy to do this. That's not what you. And it's just like, all right, John, yeah, whatever, John, change it.
Yeah, the plays had to be authentic or as authentic as they could be with the technology would allow. Of course, you go back and play those games now, but at the time. Like Madden 92 and Madden 93, on Sega Genesis, were Rich. You couldn't pull me away from the fucking TV.
Oh, they were incredible. Yeah, they're very tough to play now. Like I've gone back and tried to play like Madden 95, and they're almost unplayable these days.
They're relics at this point.
They're really hard to play. They're very hard to play. But yeah, at the time, like I would say Madden, it was probably 95 was the one that I like. Jesus, I just played that one constantly. Like that game,
but you have
I wore that game out.
The comparison point is like 10-yard fight and shit like that. So it's like,
oh yeah, garbage. That's absolute trash.
The games were great probably until around 2005.
Yeah, other than Tecmo Super Bowl. Tecmo Super Bowl was the only one, but that's like not, that's such a gimmicky game. It's not a football game in the same sense that like a Madden 95 is. I'm not being blasphemous or whatever. Tecmo's fine. It's really fun, but it's an arcade game that's a football game. You know what I mean? Like it's not a football game.
Tecmo's great, and I play it to this day. It's arcade style. It's different. Madden wanted the game to teach people something and be as realistic as it could be for its time.
Mm-hmm.
And there's that other famous anecdote where he was watching his grandkids play, and they kept going for it on 4th down, and it annoyed him. And he went to the programmers the next year and he said, my grandkids kept converting on 4th and 10, 4th and 20. We got to fix this. I don't care what you do. We got to make it to where that's hard to do. And he made them program in like a penalizer, like a hidden penalizer in the programming, where if you went for it on 4th and like 15 or whatever from the other side of the 50, the game made it harder to complete a pass or to convert the first down.
Right. And in later games, he would just berate you the entire time and be like, I don't know what these guys are doing. This is a terrible call by the coach. Yeah. You're like, oh, man. And then, you'd have like a good play, but then you get sacked or whatever. You would learn pretty quickly. I shouldn't go for it on 4th. Like,
yeah, and he would sit in those meetings and they would add, it would have been very easy just to keep those same. You go back and look at those old playbooks and those old Madden games, and they're the playbooks of the day. They're not playbooks. No one's using Pro Set today with split back formations and like near and far halfback formations but the playbooks evolved in the game the same way playbooks in the real NFL because Madden demanded that. And that's why the games endured, and that's why they did so much better and survived and beat the Joe Montana footballs and the Tecmos and all these other games and became the preeminent brand of football. Now, look, they've stunk for the last 15 years, but I don't play them. I can't really speak on it. I just know what everybody else says. But it established itself as the brand because of the attention and the effort that Madden put into the game. And if his name was going to be on it, it was going to represent pro football in the way that he wanted it to represent it. And as a result of those games being so good for so long, it really did cultivate generations of fans. And I do think it's a contributor to how popular the NFL is today. I think there's no question about it that game made fans, created fans for the NFL, and is still doing so today. You know, there's no question. And what about this? Do esports exist in their current form without Madden? I mean, that all started with Madden.
Yeah, they might, but yeah, I'm somebody who participated in a lot of the Madden tournaments. I would, anytime they were locally here, the actual sponsored Madden tournaments, not counting also the under the table, you know, at a guy's house putting in money in the pool. I did those as well, but yeah, the Madden Bowls or whatever they were called, or I forget what the touring one was called. The Madden Bowl was the one with the I think the players, but Madden Challenge is what the one was.
Madden
yeah,
Challenge.
I used to. Yeah, we did those a bunch of different years, and yeah, some of my favorite memories were, you know, going to those and doing those. And I had a buddy once who made it to the Final Four, and it was like, holy crap, like we're actually going to do this. And you know, he ended up losing or whatever, but we still to this day talk about that and the plays that he did and the games that he had. Like we remember every single one of those games that we had, and yeah, like my summers and falls and I mean, that's all I would do with my friends. We'd go over and we'd play Madden or we'd play NCAA, but the NCAA football games are a derivative of Madden. Those don't exist without Madden. I just played NCAA 14 this morning, Joe. This morning I played that game.
The NCAA games, which also made millions and millions of dollars, they just used the Madden engine. It's the
right.
Same fucking game. You know? And you know my history with competitive Madden. I mean, Madden 2003, I was one of the best players in the world. I mean, I'm not making that. I mean, I was. You know, and then by 2005, I hated the game and I never played it again. But, you know, I think, you know, that was a big part of kickstarting esports and all of that as well, because Madden was, you know, in the earliest days of online gaming, you know, Madden was one of the top competitive online games. So there's that whole aspect to it too.
Yeah, well, it's the reason why I figured out how to get online and figure out how to play online video games was because of Madden. You know, that's 100% exactly why I did it is for Madden. And yeah, those games really stand like that era that we're talking about here, and I think the era that most people probably think of is like the 2001 to 2005 is like my peak Madden, with 03 probably being the peak of them all. To me, that's one of the greatest football games ever created. Like it's just, it's in a pantheon all to itself. 2004, that was the year, you know, Michael Vick comes in the league.
The Vick cover.
That one's tough because Vick is so good and like so impossible, and online everybody knew that you could just use him to exploit the game. It started to get a little weird in 04. And then 05 is the hit stick, and I know you hate the hit stick, but
03 was my personal peak, and that's when I was, you know, winning tournaments and all that shit. 04, it was starting. It wasn't great. 05, I remember buying it at midnight, bringing it home.
It's still good. You know, you're.
Listen, but I was ahead of the curve. You got to admit.
Yeah, no, you were. You were 1 year ahead of the curve because we all jumped on in 2006. Yeah. 2006, the QB cone. We all decided, all right, never mind. This game actually sucks. But
05, I played it. I played 2 or 3 games that night, and I brought the game. It wasn't. I don't think it was GameStop. Was it Funko Land then, or was it GameStop?
It probably was.
It might have been GameStop.
It was probably GameStop by then. Yeah.
Whatever trade-in company, I remember bringing it the very next day.
You traded in the next day.
And Rich, I haven't played since. 16 years later, I haven't picked up a joystick and played Madden since. I mean, it turned me off that much. And you know how hardcore I was about that game.
Yeah, it's the reason we know each other. So yeah,
I said this isn't the same game. I can't play this anymore. That was that. I think I played NCAA a couple more years though, and but Madden I never picked it up again. I think I may have played a couple downs here or there on in-store displays over the years, but I've never played like a full game of Madden since. And I'm a lot like John Madden. He had a panic attack on a flight in 1980, and he never flew again.
Never flew again. Bus, yeah. Took a bus everywhere.
He said, if this plane lands and I'm alive, I'm never stepping foot on an airplane again. And he kept his word. He took trains for the first few years. And then as the story goes, they had to get him somewhere quickly. So the network rented him a tour bus, and it was Dolly Parton's tour bus. And he took that ride in the tour bus and said, I need one of these. No more trains. So then they got him a tour bus, and then that became the Madden Cruiser. And he took the Madden Cruiser, for the rest of his career. Never stepped foot on an airplane again. So crisscrossing across the country. And what they would do is, because the tech, we're talking late 80s, okay? And the technology wasn't there yet. They had to get him his game notes, because sometimes he would do a game in New York, and then the next week he had to be in San Francisco or LA, and you got to drive across the country on a bus. It's going to take you a couple days. So this is unbelievable. What they would do is they would fax the game notes and his prep. They would prep his note. They would fax his prep notes to truck stops, and they would stop for gas, and then they would they would fax him his game notes behind the counter, of the fucking convenience store in the truck stop. And then he would study his game notes on the way to the next city. Because you remember, there's no cell phones, there's no internet, there's no laptop, there's none of that shit. This is a guy who would just get on the bus after one game and drive cross country. And, he had to study and understand people think that these announcers just show up at games. And no, they have to do prep work before they do these games. They have to know who's on these teams. They have to know the schemes that these teams are running. They have to, the good ones do anyway. And he'd get his notes at truck stops via the fax machine, which I also found fascinating and just incredible how they would find a way to get things done with this ancient 1980s technology. But yeah, never stepped foot on a plane after 1980. Elected to the Hall of Fame in 2006, which was way overdue. Ridiculous. He should have been in the Hall of Fame as a coach the day he was eligible. But, it's this whole thing, during his coaching career until he won that Super Bowl, despite the fact that he won 75% of his games and went to 7 AFC championship games, he was considered a failure until he won the Super Bowl. Because you know how that shit goes. This, championship or bust mentality. But he did end up winning his one Super Bowl. Very innovative as a coach. He was an assistant coach under Don Coryell at San Diego State. Don Coryell is the godfather of the modern vertical passing offense. Another guy who belongs in the Hall of Fame, by the way.
Is he not he's not in the Hall of Fame?
Can you believe that shit?
Really?
Don Coryell is not in the Pro Football
the man
Hall of Fame.
that basically every offense from 1970 till today can thank him, and he's not. Okay.
You're watching his offensive schemes every Sunday to this day. He basically invented the vertical. Why do you think the Raiders with Ken Stabler did all that vertical passing? That came from John Madden coaching under Don Coryell. So he learned from Don Coryell at San Diego State, and then he also studied Vince Lombardi. And what John Madden did with those old Raider teams is he combined the two. So he ran all those Vince Lombardi power sweeps with Mark Van Egan and those great offensive linemen. He had Art Shell, and he had 3 Hall of Fame offensive linemen on that team. Jim Otto at center and Art Shell and all these guys. So they ran the Vince Lombardi power sweeps, and he incorporated the Don Coryell downfield passing game. With guys like Fred Biletnikoff and Dave Casper and Ken Stabler, obviously a quarterback who was an absolute, gunslinger at that position, at that time. And it was this hybrid offense that nobody else was running. In those days, you either ran 3 yards in a cloud of dust, or you were Don Coryell with the Chargers and you had your vertical, but you didn't do both. Nobody did both. Madden said, why can't we have the best of both worlds? And he was a defensive coach. He was a linebacker coach for the Raiders when he got promoted to head coach at the age of 32. Which I think he was the youngest head coach in the history of the league until Sean McVay a couple years ago at the age of 30. I think Raheem Morris might have been younger than Madden too when he took over the Bucs But the point here is, 32 years old, head coach, promoted from linebacker coach, and the Raiders were a successful franchise, and Al Davis believed in them and promoted them, and it obviously worked out. And then Tom Flores took over from there, another Hall of Fame coach. Who worked under Madden. So he was an innovative coach on top of all of the people. That's the thing, like, and that gets forgotten that the guy was a Hall of Fame coach on top of everything else. The understudy of Don Coryell and Vince Lombardi and that other famous story where he went to a coaching seminar that Vince Lombardi was holding, and it was an 8-hour seminar, an 8-hour coaching seminar by Vince Lombardi, where he broke down one play for the entire 8 hours, the Green Bay Packer off tackle power sweep. 8 hours. And Madden left that seminar thinking, I don't know shit about football. I thought I knew about football. This man knows more about one play than I know about football. And he knew he had to get back to work and if he wanted to be a better coach. And then that's when he, decided I am going to use a lot of Lombardi's concepts when I become a head coach. And mixed him in with the Coryell stuff. And it was just, but yeah, just a Hall of Famer on 3 or 4 different levels.
Yep.
An absolute icon, an American icon, international in a lot of ways too. I mean, that video game is international, and again, without John Madden, this show doesn't exist. And by the way, learned this today, and I'm sure you saw the tweet, on the same high school team as Nick Bockwinkel. How about that?
Oh man, no, I did not know that. Thank you for getting it back to wrestling. There we go.
He was on the same high school football team as Nick Bockwinkel.
That's some good talkers. There's some all-time talkers on that football team, man.
John Madden was the center and a defensive tackle, and Nick Bockwinkel was the fullback, and he played linebacker.
Hell yeah. The masters of the microphone on that high school football team. Incredible.
To bring it back to wrestling.
Two of the all-time great talkers
in
their fields. Yeah, there you go.
All the way full circle.
There it is. But so you can either thank or blame John Madden for this show existing, because there's a very, very good chance that I'm not watching wrestling, and you don't recommend Ring of Honor to me, you don't recommend New Japan to me, and I just stop watching altogether, if not for John Madden's video games. So
yeah, and he's the kind of, John Madden is someone who, I know it's illogical and I know it makes no sense. I thought he would never die. He's one of those people where I saw the news yesterday and it really froze me in my tracks. I'm like, there's no way that John Madden's dead. That's not possible. John Madden cannot die. I know that doesn't sound...
No, I know it's the same. So what ended up happening is the nurse came up to me and said, look at this headline. This is ridiculous. And she's just kind of laughing about it. And it says, John Madden dies unexpectedly at age 85 or whatever.
Yeah,
and,
you don't die unexpectedly at 85.
Yeah, well, she shows me a picture and she goes, do you know who this guy is? And I go, yeah, I know who John Madden is or whatever. She goes, died unexpectedly. He's 85 and he's fat. That's not unexpected. And I said, for John, and I tried to explain to her exactly what you're saying. I was like, for Madden, though, it's unexpected. Nobody ever expected this man to ever die. I was like, I understand what you're saying. I get what you're saying. Yeah. He looks like he should have died a long time ago. He's overweight. He's 85 years old. A lot of 85-year-olds die. It's never unexpected if you pass away when you're 85. But I was like, no, I'm telling you, that's not a ridiculous headline. It is unexpected that John Madden died. Despite exactly what he looks like and despite his age, I'm like, I'm telling you, I promise you, It is unexpected. I was taken aback. Joe was, anybody who knows this guy was taken aback because he's John Madden. He's eternal. You just figure he's eternal because his name's going to be eternal and his impact on sports and culture is eternal. So you just assume he's eternal.
Yeah, he's one of the only people where you'd say you died unexpectedly at 85 years old.
Right, and looked like that. He wasn't like a marathon runner. You know what I mean? He wasn't the healthiest looking person in the world either. So yeah,
and made no attempts to stay healthy.
No.
He had a million famous quotes. We could do a whole show just on his quotes. But one of his quotes was, people say that your body's a temple and you should only put things in your body that, because your body's a temple. He's like, I view my body as a garage. I could just store whatever I want. Right. Yeah. He didn't make no attempts, and the thing about it is he was still sharp as a tack. He was still involved with the league, and it's so surreal because he just had his new documentary, that Tom Rinaldi documentary.
Yeah. I've not watched it yet, but I'm probably going to watch it tonight.
It aired on Fox on Christmas. They re-aired it last night on FS1 after he died, and they're airing it tomorrow at 8 o'clock on Fox.
And I believe ESPN Plus is streaming it as well now.
Yeah. So that documentary, which just aired on Christmas, and Rich, it's haunting because the way the documentary is done, it's John Madden sitting in a chair in a dark room, and he's watching the documentary with you. Like every now and then they'll cut to him watching what you're watching on his screen in this dark room, and people honoring him and talking about him. And he's got like this shit-eating grin on his face. It's almost like this man is watching his life story unfold, now that he passed. And it's very sweet and haunting in a way, because I didn't watch the documentary on Christmas. I blew it off. I'm like, I'll get to it. And then when he passed, I'm like, I have to watch it tonight. And watching it after the fact with the way that it was shot, it's almost like he's watching his life unfold after his death.
Yeah, like he can go peacefully. His life story has been told, and now he can go.
And all these people are saying these great things about him, and they show him, and he's smiling, and the final scene in the documentary is Lawrence Taylor. It opens with Lawrence Taylor, and it closes with Lawrence Taylor. And it opens with Lawrence Taylor saying, the NFL asks me to do things all the time, and my daughter tells me, hey, the NFL, and I'm like, go tell them to F themselves. You want me to do something for John Madden? Tell me when and where.
Yeah.
Right. So that's how it opens. And then it closes with Lawrence Taylor. And with Lawrence Taylor saying, and you see Madden in his chair watching Lawrence Taylor. And Taylor says, John Madden made me a better football player because I didn't want to let John Madden down. I wanted to, make the Madden team. And I wanted to make sure John Madden appreciated the way I played. And John Madden made me a better player. Right. And then it fades off, and the camera cuts to Madden sitting there in the chair, and he's got this big smile on his face, and he's in reflective thought, and he goes, I realize now what I never realized. That's how it ends. Just a total Maddenism.
Yeah. Wow.
Where it's just but it makes so much sense. Like typical Madden, where he says something that's so poignant that it doesn't, and you're like, and what a great way to end that. And then watching that after he passed is like, it teared me up. It teared me up. The documentary now almost acts like a postscript to the man's life, and he got to watch it unfold.